Hi, everyone. Welcome to this evening's conversation, Dare to Lead, Strategies to Address the Climate Challenge Head-On with Representative Patricia Roybal Caballero. My name is Artemisio, and I'm a lead member of YUCCA Action, a part of the Youth United for Climate Crisis Action. I'll be hosting tonight with my fellow spokes team members. Let's hear from everyone.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Seneca Johnson, and I'm also a lead organizer with YUCCA Action. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. We look forward to a rich conversation with our representatives as we explore how to advance bold solutions to the climate crisis that also foster the justice that we need in our economic, social, and environmental systems.
So tonight's event is going to be structured as a conversation with U.S. Representative Deb Haaland and State Representative Patricia Roybal Caballero. We want to explore how to push past the rhetoric and conventional incremental approach to the bold solutions that this moment demands. But before we go any further, we always start by grounding in a place of relation. So here to lead our land acknowledgement and opening is Maya Chavez.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Maya Chavez. I'm a member of YUCCA coming from the Pueblo San Felipe, and I'm currently a senior at the Santa Fe Indian School. First off, I'd like to acknowledge the land that we reside and gather on today, the Tewa Pueblo people's land. We as individuals are responsible for respecting the land that has been unjustly stolen from the Pueblo, Diné, and Apache people of New Mexico, both historically and in the present day. By acknowledging those that originated on this land, we as a society can take a step to further solidarity with Indigenous peoples. As an Indigenous woman myself, I have watched as our predominantly industrial society has taken and exploited Mother Nature, who has always so tenderly cared for us, her children, and the residents of this planet. In response to my observations of this destruction of nature, I wrote and released a song called Butterfly Beauty. Although not everyone may hear it at first, I wrote this song from the perspective of Mother Earth, telling the story of how much she has sacrificed to create the wonders of nature, only to struggle with humans' industrial agriculture, greed for resources, and overall pollution of her planet. I can only hope that one day we can return the favor to her and help her flourish once again. And with that, here's my song.
Lost in the eye of a watercolor sunset. I've lost my mind for the butterflies' wings of beauty. When the clouds glow, and will the honey rays fade upon me? Fade upon me. I'm lost in the sweet crystal breeze of this journey. I lost my dreams while the softens my dark, silver and green. When the brush sways, when will I know what's lurking upon me? I'm lost in the thunderous clouds full of lightning. I lost my sanity for the roar of the mountains collapse. When the night cries and the dark skies will finally break me. Yes, to break me. Yes, to break me. Yes, to break me.
Butterfly Beauty is my own personal way to influence and encourage others to think about their own actions and how these actions influence their own ecological footprint. I'm very glad to be hearing from two very powerful women who share these similar values. Again, thank you all for listening in. Nitra.
Thank you so much, Maya. It's so important that we remember why we are all here and what we are fighting to protect. As we approach the upcoming election, so much is at stake. It's not an exaggeration to say that it is a truly to do or to die moment. At YUCCA, we are part of a growing movement dedicated to holding our elected officials accountable, to protecting the well-being of our communities and the health of future generations. For us, this movement is intersectional, and we see the connection between racial, economic, and environmental justice as inextricably linked. The state of New Mexico is home to the Permian Basin, which has become tragically dependent on oil, and we've become tragically dependent on oil revenue for the state budget. With the advent of the COVID-19 crisis and the associated crash of the New Mexico oil market, our state finds itself in a tough position. We need elected leaders who have the creativity, vision, and wisdom to co-create a new economy, to put an end to extraction and exploitation, and create a sustainable and just way of life for New Mexico's residents and with New Mexico's residents. We need swift and decisive action. We, the next generation, will ensure that the candidates and elected leaders hear our voices and face the reality of our endangered future with justice, equity, accountability, and courage.
Thank you, Arte. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Yang. I come from the Diné Nations in Farmington, New Mexico. I am a YUCCA leader, and I have the honor to introduce our first special guest. With us tonight is this esteemed representative for the House District 13, Representative Patricia Roybal Caballero. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you, and I'd like to give my special thanks to our Congresswoman, Deb Haaland, for joining us today. Again, my name is Patricia Roybal Caballero, and I'm coming tonight from a place that is close to my heart, and that is the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I come here because this is the place of my social and emotional and traditional grounding in so many different ways. I am an Indigenous woman, and I am a proud member of the Pito Manso Tiwa Indian tribe, San Juan de Guadalupe Pueblo, out of Las Cruces, New Mexico. As an Indigenous woman, I revere our land, our air, our water as being sacred and as being sacred to our life. Thank you to YUCCA Action. Thank you to everyone listening today, and thank you to our Congresswoman for joining us in what I believe will be an invigorating and hopefully changing conversation concerning our climate and what we are to do next. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Roybal Caballero has been in the state legislature for 7 years. She has been a champion for community solar in the state, as well as advancing the economic conditions, educational attainment, political influence, health, and civil rights of our communities here in New Mexico. We welcome and are grateful for any and all donations tonight. Any money graciously donated will go towards the campaign to re-elect Representative Patricia Roybal Caballero, and to the YUCCA Action to help us engage voters this election. We acknowledge that COVID-19 has put a financial strain on so many families, but we all know how important it is to elect people and support organizations who will take bold action. So we are challenging all of those supporters to donate. However big or small, for the future of our communities and climate, we thank you for all of your support. To learn more about Patricia and her campaign, visit patriciafornewmexico.com. If you would like to make any or make a direct donation, you can find the link in the Zoom chat thread or on the Facebook page. And now I'd like to pass it on to Seneca.
Thank you. So tonight we are also very excited to welcome special guest Congresswoman Deb Haaland. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Seneca. and always honored to join my sister in the struggle, Patricia Roybal Caballero. I am so proud of the work she has done in the state legislature. Her voice is so important to so many people, and I am just very honored to be here and to be here with everyone who cares about this issue, who cares about our state, who wants to move our state forward in a good way and make sure that every single person who lives in this sacred place can find success. And I think that we can do that. We just have to fight hard for it. So thank you so much. And I'm honored to be here from Washington, D.C., also indigenous land, the Anacostan and the Piscataway people were here. Many other tribes, of course, as well. But honored to be here from their lands. Thank you.
I'm very happy to have you. So Congresswoman Haaland was elected to serve Congressional District 1 in 2018. She was elected as one of the first Native American women to serve in Congress and has taken big money out of her campaign to support her community and her grassroots campaign team. She pushes for bold climate action for the future of our young people. And we are very excited to talk more with you both about what you have done and hope to do for our communities in New Mexico, as well as how we can push all of our elected officials to lead with courage.
To start off, we hope that you will introduce yourself a little bit more and tell us why environmental justice and climate justice are so important to you. Please describe your personal history in the environmental climate movement. What's your connection to this work? Let's go ahead and start with Deb Haaland.
Thank you, Yang. So, I mean, I feel like, you know, I didn't start out as an activist. I started out as a child of a military family who moved around a lot and who had opportunities to live near the ocean, both oceans, on the East Coast and the West Coast. My dad was raised on a farm, and so he felt very comfortable outdoors and made sure that we were outdoors as often as we possibly could be. I grew up on mountain trails, rowing, rowing a rowboat in swamps, fishing on lakes. Wading through streams with, cold streams with our sneakers on, climbing rocks and mountains and things like that. I just feel very strongly that those are the things that I grew up with. Future generations should have that opportunity. I live personally, I am very cognizant of what I do to the earth, what I put in it, where my recycling and my, garbage goes. How can I tread as lightly as possible? I've been taking my own bags to grocery stores, for example, for probably about 45 years. I have been composting for probably 30 years. I've been doing, I feel like I'm not a scientist, but I had an interest in doing everything I could to protect the earth, so that prompted me to read books. Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, for example, was something I read decades ago that was all about how pesticides were ruining bird habitats and things like that. So I just feel like as maybe a lay person with our environment, it made me very cognizant of why we need to protect our sacred spaces. Now, as a member of Congress, I'm the chair of the Subcommittee on National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands. I'm the vice chair of the Natural Resources Committee. During the time I was running for this office, starting in 2017, my most important issue was the environment. It wasn't because it was a hot issue or I felt I wanted to get votes. It's because it was personally important to me and I did not want to run on anything else but that. So, so I just feel that in the position I'm in, I need to use my voice, my place in Congress to make sure that I'm fighting for the things that we should be fighting for. In our Natural Resources Committee, when I first got sworn in, the first 3 hearings we had were all on climate change. If you know that the Republicans had the House, they were the majority in the House for many terms. There hadn't been a hearing on climate change in 10 years. And so, so it's our obligation to make sure that we're fighting for these things, that we are doing everything we can, bringing scientists to the table, bringing tribal leaders to the table so that they can be on the record about how climate change is changing their lives, changing their communities. And so I'm just very honored to have that opportunity, and I'll just keep fighting. Thank you.
I guess I'll go next. So my story is vast. I was raised by a father and a mother, a father who was in the military, and my mother who was the social activist in the family. But really, the person that was most influential and close to me was my grandfather. My grandfather Vicente was the chief of the tribe. He was a spiritual leader, and he grounded me in what, excuse me, what I believe are my ties to our ties and viewing the importance of protecting our land, our air, and our water. He used to take me, I was his oldest grandchild, and he used to take me on long walks in the desert. And we would collect herbs, and he would point out all the herbs and all the medicinal value. And he would give me a history lesson on where those herbs came from and what they were used for. He would associate song to the herbs. He would sing and chant to me, revering these herbs for each one of their meanings. He would talk to me about why the rabbits running around were so important and such an important life source, and why they were and to whom they were a life source. He would talk to me about the clouds and how to determine the clouds' positions and what they meant. Were they going to bring water? Were they going to, what they were going to bring? So he taught me many, many lessons as we were walking the desert. He was the healer in our community. People would line up, men, women, families would line up because he had a healing hand. And he knew exactly how to respond to those families that did not have insurance, that could not go to a doctor. And he had practiced his healing for so many years, and he had learned them and been successful in healing individuals. And so he also had me witness with him how he converted herbs into tinctures and the multiple uses of them. So this was my beginning as a small child in appreciating what Mother Earth was yielding, and the beauty and the wealth in what we have in our Mother Earth. In addition to that, I was a social activist of the 60s. I'm a product of the 60s and of the 70s and of the social movements of that time period. And as such, I became very active in those movements. And one of the movements I was active in was United Farm Workers. And I was a field organizer. I was a campaign organizer. I was trained as a community organizer by the United Farm Workers. And one of my tasks when I was living in Boulder, Colorado, attending the University of Colorado in Boulder, was to lead the secondary boycott against the grape growers in California and all the major growers in California. And the secondary boycott was focused on the use of pesticides and how pesticides were extremely harmful, not just to the farm workers, but to the consumers. And so the United Farm Workers felt in not being able to negotiate with the owners on stopping the use of the pesticides, they took into action a secondary boycott on the products that were being produced to try to put economic pressure. So that was part of my organizing work. And then I was fortunate to have my second son later in life, and in the early 90s, as a third grader, he came home and said, very excited, that he wanted to do his science project. And he already knew what he was going to do it on. And his science project was going to be on global warming and the effects of global warming on our future and climate changes, and how recycling was so important. He wanted to demonstrate in his project the relationship between recycling, global warming, and protecting our future. This was a third grader. And he further enlightened me with the research and what he wanted to do. And so I heard him then as a third grader, and now as a 32-year-old, I continue to hear him. I hear all of you, and I realize that this is not just something that is a fad. It's not something that's popular. It is something that's ingrained in our worldviews. It's ingrained in our traditions. It's ingrained in the representation of his generation. This is the fight for your lives in his generation, in your generation. And I want to honor that, and I want to respect that, and I want to continue that fight for as long as I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Patricia and Congresswoman Deb. Your responses really touch the lives of many citizens of New Mexico and help us understand where you come from. I'm not sure if Seneca and Arte have follow-up questions. Okay, we're gonna go to the next question. What are you currently doing regarding climate justice, and how do your current initiatives fit in with your larger vision for how we can transition? I'll call on you, Representative Patricia.
Thank you. As many of you know and have been following me and our work together actually on community solar, this is an important effort that I've been undertaking since I was elected. And I want to give a lot of credit to the fact that my style as a representative is I do not come in with an agenda. I do not come in with a list of priorities that are my priorities. I come in asking my communities, my constituencies, and those around the state, what is important to them. And so early on in 2013, after I took office, the community, excuse me, constituents in my community came to me. They were known as the Juntos Clean Our Air, Our Land, Our Water community group, community action group. And they came to me and asked and invited me to a series of, to their meetings, their regular meetings. And they introduced me to two of their priorities that I thought were absolutely incredibly important. But what I admired, because I'm a community organizer, was their efforts and the degree of research that they had done in these arenas. And so I introduced on their behalf the two pieces of legislation, and one was associated with the Volkswagen settlement. And the Volkswagen settlement for the state of New Mexico was $18 million. And with that settlement, the group was asking that I ask for the settlement money to be targeted for converting all the school buses, removing them from diesel run to electric run. They felt that that would be a fair response to the fact that Volkswagen had been held responsible for a series of legal infractions that that hurt the lives of the users. And so I introduced a memorial for that. And then along with our Senator Linda Lopez is my senator in my district. And then I also, they also brought forward community solar. Community solar with the understanding that this would be a way in which to give communities, individuals living in communities, access to what we have abundant in our state, and that is sun and solar energy. And the thinking behind the community solar was we have communities that are traditionally left out of accessing the renewable energy world, simply because in terms of solar energy, the solar energy had been primarily those that are homeowners and on rooftops. And the majority of our low income and moderate income families are renters and don't have access to being homeowners. So they presented these two priorities, of which I have been the sponsor of since 2013. Tried different time periods, different legislative sessions. We've won in the House of Representatives one session, and then we were unable to get it beyond the House in the Senate. And so we've been trying several years. I've been bringing it up. I've been a thorn in the side of our legislative houses because I continue to raise the community solar. We're working on community solar right now through a working group as a result of Senate Memorial 163. And that was passed in this last session. And hopefully this working group will get us closer to and actually passing a bill with the support of our entire House and our governor. So these are just a few examples of what I have pursued legislatively. And I, of course, am waiting to anxiously hear of other legislative priorities. Of course, I've supported every piece of legislation that's come through. I voted for that has been in the area of renewable energy and taking our state. I was a co-sponsor of the ETA that was passed in 2019. In 2019. So just to give you a little bit, that is what I've been looking at and endorsing and supporting. And there's many more, but I'll go ahead and let Congresswoman Deb Haaland take us to the national level. There are a lot of things, Congresswoman, that I know around the Clean New Deal and other bills that you are supporting in Congress that are perfectly aligned with what it is that we need to do as states. So I'm hoping to continue our support on that level.
Thank you, Representative. So a couple things. Some of you might know that we, myself, Ben Ray, Lujan Xochitl signed on to this bill as well, and it's been supported by our senators. It's the, it's the bill, the Chaco Canyon Cultural, I forget the names of these bills. It's to protect a 10-mile radius around Chaco Canyon from gas and oil drilling. And I think that's one of the things we need to do. Right now, our public lands emit 25% of carbon into the atmosphere. And our public lands shouldn't be doing that, right? It should, we need fewer gas and oil drilling on public lands and more renewable energy projects on public lands. And there was a piece in the Albuquerque Journal today, and I'll just show it to you here, if you can see that. It says a report finds that, report, banning drilling on federal lands would hurt New Mexico. And I think that depends on where you're coming from, right? We have the largest methane cloud hovering over the northwest corner of our state. Do you think that hurts New Mexico? I think it does. I think it hurts people who have to breathe that every single day. Do you think that all the unreclaimed uranium mines around the state that are polluting water and blowing radiation around hurts New Mexico? I think that does also. So I think it depends on where you are on this issue, on whether you think these things hurt New Mexico or not. But I will say that what we're working on right now, one of them is the 30 by 30 resolution. And I'm happy to say that the Biden campaign endorsed this resolution. It's to preserve 30% of our land and 30% of our water by 2030. We believe that protecting our land and water from any kind of destruction by drilling or mining or anything like that will exacerbate climate change. So we want to protect that 30 by 30 by 30% of our land and water by 2030. I've also introduced the Climate Stewardship Act, and that promotes farm stewardship. It restores wetlands, and it calls for us to plant 15 billion trees. The Climate Stewardship Act, the main piece of that is to sequester carbon by healthier soils and more local farming and restoring these wetlands and so forth. And we believe that that will help. Now, whenever we are drafting bills of this nature, we don't just think about things and decide to start writing. We consult with the scientists and with the organizations who are working to preserve these things. Another piece that I'm working on that we've introduced is the 100% Clean Economy Act. And that's sort of modeled after the Energy Transition Act of New Mexico. And that is to get to 100% renewable energy by 2050, essentially working to make, to cause a net zero carbon from going into the atmosphere. There are many other issues I'm working on, as you all know, since the pandemic started. It has highlighted the disparities that we have in so many communities. And tomorrow we're having a press conference on my Thrive resolution, and the resolution essentially works to, the Thrive stands for Transform, Heal, and Renew by Investing in a Vibrant Economy. So we are looking at how this pandemic has exacerbated the disparities that communities of color face, and working to make them better. Like, we don't want to go back to normal. We want to go back to better. We want people to have more opportunities and not be in the same ruts that they were in prior to when this pandemic started. So keep an eye out on my social media. If you have a moment, you can probably watch our press conference tomorrow. I believe it starts at 11 a.m. Eastern time, and you'll be able to hear more about our Thrive resolution. It is a resolution that I am co-sponsoring with Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts. Another thing I'll mention quickly is the Great American Outdoors Act that was passed by the Senate, passed by the House, actually signed by the President. That permanently funds the Land and Water Conservation Fund. I think we need to be putting resources toward our environment every opportunity that we have. And I want to just say that in New Mexico, when we think about, the article that I mentioned to you, I think there is a lot of economy to be boosted with our environment. We have a lot of people who visit New Mexico every year because of our mountains, because of our rivers, because of our beautiful landscapes and scenery and so forth, our national monuments and our national parks. And they will, we are able to, if we are able to keep those areas of our beautiful state pristine, unpolluted, if we are able to make sure that our wildlife is intact and they have a place to thrive and grow, I think that is good for our economy, and I think it's good for our environment. So thank you so much for the question, and thank you.
So,
Thank you so much. Oh, I'm sorry.
no, that's okay. I was just going to ask Congresswoman, did you say that tomorrow you will be having a press conference concerning the Thrive? Is that okay? Good. Thank you. So we have to make sure that we completely align with your efforts at the state level. So thank you so much for that.
I believe we have one question from Charlie. And he said, since 2019, House Bill 546 commodifies tracking wastewater for agricultural use and encourages continued contamination of groundwater for profit. There is little chance of repealing it, especially because of its unanimous passage by our state house. Wouldn't it be easier to address any type of water poisoning for profit as well as criminal offense by including it by New Mexico's criminal code? And that question's open to either you, Representative, or Congressman Deb.
So any type of contamination by any effort of our water, I think is criminal. And and especially if this action is being done with the scientific knowledge that it contaminates. And I think the Congresswoman talked also about fracking and the effects of fracking and how the science has proven that fracking processes contaminate our water, especially our underground, all our underground sources. So even the processes that have been recommended to be alternative processes, there's still processes that involve chemicals and recycling into our water systems. And so to me, there needs to be not just an expression of sentiment that we're against fracking, but we also have to address the alternatives to fracking that are profit motivated and that continue to violate the safety and hazardous laws that are in place, environmental protections that are in place to prevent contamination. And then we have to hold those same parties responsible. And if that means tagging on legal and penalties, then those are things that have to occur. But I think the better approach would be that to look at ways in which we can protect our water sources and mitigate the use. And I think we're already on that path in New Mexico by our Energy Transition Act and how it is aligning itself to convert our energy and environment to zero carbon. In line with that, we have to then match all the other pieces of legislation that address the same types of contaminants that affect not just our energy sources, but are also our water and our air. Because if we don't align, then we're piecemealing our responses to the environment. And this is environmental justice is about addressing comprehensively and holistically, taking those approaches and not piecemealing it, because we really need to create a more healthy environment all the way around, and everything that contributes to life and being a life source has to be included in whatever we do. I don't know if that answered the question, but I don't know if Congresswoman has anything else to add to that.
I would just say that this president he's done everything he can to gut the EPA and to gut the Department of the Interior, and like taking climate scientists from Alaska and putting them in the auditing department in the Department of the Interior. Those are all things that we have pushed on. You can bet that when we have a new president in office, all of those, every department that protects our environment will be built back better as well. So we're always pushing to make sure that that these things are happening, and you can bet that they will when this administration is gone.
Just one more point on the question in terms, because the question directly related to also the criminal codes in the state of New Mexico, and the answer is they definitely do need to be included in our criminal codes and whatever legal statutes that address those kind of infractions. And if we don't have legal statutes that address them, then we need to institute those so that we can begin to make that transition, a more just transition into a clean water and protection of our water. And protection of our water is not just conserving it, but it's protecting it against these types of contaminants for profit.
Thank you, Representative and Congresswoman. Our next question is, what do you see as the greatest obstacle to climate movement in your respective federal and state positions? I'm sorry. And we'll have Deb answer this first.
My greatest obstacle is Donald Trump. That's the greatest obstacle.
Yeah.
We have a president who I doubt he's ever, hiked or seen the stars from a 12,000-foot mountain, or has waded in an icy cold stream. I mean, the reason that I am so dead set on protecting our public lands is because every child deserves to have what I had, what my grandparents had. And it is unfair for us for us and him who are in these positions of decision making to take that opportunity away from future generations with impunity. And so I can tell you that along with President Trump is Mitch McConnell, who is stifling nearly every single piece of legislation that the House has sent to the other side, to the Senate side. We have gotten a few bills through, but not nearly as many as we should. And look, the environment is tied to so many other things as well. It's tied to, we passed the HEROES Act. It's tied to people's health care. It's tied to whether folks can get food or not. It's tied to, the fact that women are paid unequally in this country. It's tied to so many things. And all of, we even had a hearing in our Natural Resources Committee about the LGBTQ community being able to enjoy our public lands like everyone else, because there is discrimination on the trails of our public lands in this country. So I am wholeheartedly working to remedy this terrible stifling of progress in our country that is Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell. So if you all want to make sure that we have a future for climate change, register to vote, get out and vote. answer the census. Those are all things that we know we can do right now to work toward making this situation better. Right now, it is pouring rain outside here in Washington, D.C. I should close my window because I think it's coming inside. While Oregon, California, and so many other places are on fire. It was 46 degrees in Albuquerque today. Yesterday, it was over 100 degrees, or day before yesterday, it was over 100 degrees in Colorado, and then it was snowing today. That is climate change. And we need people in office who are going to take this seriously and make sure that we can move this forward.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I couldn't have said it better in terms of what we need to do, and that's first on the agenda, and that's to get Trump and Mitch McConnell out of office. We have been, so much progress was rolled back in just these few years, and it's like any other type of race. It's so much harder to catch up and redo, and his administration has forced us into that position. So I have a few, actually a few obstacles, but I'll highlight a couple. And as a Congresswoman stated, excuse me, we have seen the naysayers are still around, and they're still very predominant, and they still want us to believe that climate change, like Trump says, is a hoax. As he says, so many other real life situations are these days. It's a hoax. But as we've seen, and as a Congresswoman just described, we went just the last few days, actually just in the last 48 hours, from 90-degree weather to 50s in 24 hours. And it's actually, we have snow flurries on the mountains, Congresswoman, right now, as we were coming in mixed with rain. And if those are not extreme weather situations that we're facing, and if that's not related to climate change, then I don't know what. But they are also forcing us to have to reshape our infrastructures and address our how we manage our resource management in a different way. So as we're going through and experiencing these weather altering situations, we have got to be in the good position to be able to address those reshaping that infrastructure and resource management. And the second most important, and probably the most important obstacle in my view, is the whole notion of capitalism versus climate and the battle over who controls the resources, and energy resources. And as energy has been, we've been speaking about energy being abundant in New Mexico in particular and accessible. We also have seen the profit motive industries trying to advance and become the new bastions of renewable energy, when we know that it is actually their move to control the profit behind what we all know will be the future and is the future, and that is the energy, renewable energies. And so, as I've mentioned, I come from a background of many social movements my entire life, and the reasons why I got involved and continue to get involved in these social movements is to challenge these types of profit motive systems, and to change them and decentralize power and money and access. What I believe are those types of systems that we as a people, as a community, own and should share. And that's really really important to me, because these very systems of power and money have been the very systems that have kept our poor people poor, and have kept our working poor, have eliminated almost entirely our middle class, have contributed to just the disproportionate and disparate effect of all of what we've just been describing. So it's all interrelated. Our environment is our economy, and it's all very interrelated. And so we've got to be able to be positioned to allow our communities to thrive, not just survive. We cannot continue on the survival mode because this survival mode will continue to create a disproportionate effect on our communities and lead to what we have seen as the continuation of social and economic disparities, but also affecting our healthcare and also affecting our livelihoods and dismantling of what we grew up at knowing as communities, neighborhoods, as families, because we've always extended ourselves from family into our communities. And we've seen a slow erosion of that collective sense of collective good or sense of just acting as a community. And so I think it's a change of mindset. It's reigniting what we're grounded on, and as Indigenous peoples in particular, and taking the lead on introducing those solutions that are grounded in our worldview and in our beliefs, because it is this worldview and our beliefs that have led to our continuation and our resilience and in where we are today. So, you know, I could go on with a number of obstacles, but I agree. I think we really need to focus our immediate actions on registering to vote. If you haven't registered, accessing the absentee ballot process immediately. Next week, they're going to be going out. The ballots will be going, the application forms will be going out next week here in Bernalillo County and many other counties in the state, and returning them, and just continuing to do all that we can to pull out and organize, mobilize, and vote on November 3rd. This is and has been stated is the election of our lifetime. It means either we're going to go forward or we're going to step back and further back and have very little ability to recover and recapture the progress that we made prior to the Trump administration. So thank you. And before I forget, I do have some very powerful people behind me, not just the artwork. And I just wanted to acknowledge their presence here with me. I have a fierce mother-daughter team, Anne Barudin and Mayani Barudin with me. They're the mother-daughter to the mother-sons on my team, on my end over here. And then, of course, I have my husband, Carlos Caballero, who is undoubtedly, I guess, my biggest support and endorser of everything I do. So I want to thank them all for being here with me tonight. And again, my thanks to the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center for affording me the opportunity to be here. And just remember, the Cultural Center is a tremendous asset to all of our native tribal entities around the state, and continue to be the economic drivers for our communities. And so however way we can continue to support the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center and all of their diverse economies, once we're able to do that in a once our restrictions are lifted with COVID, I would encourage all of us to do that. Thank you.
And thank you both for your wisdom. The next question we want to ask is, can you speak to the challenge of false solutions? What do we do when political pragmatism is at odds with scientific and frontline communities' lived experiences? And that's to either of you, whoever wants to answer first.
Well, I could just say that you just keep fighting. I mean, you keep fighting. You know, I first won in 2018. I was sworn in with some really amazing, amazing environmental champions. And I feel like it's kind of a new day here in Congress for environmental activism. One of my colleagues, Joe Cunningham from South Carolina, we had a hearing about whales and the loud noise pollution in the ocean that affects whales in a very negative way. And so there was somebody on the witness stand that the Republicans had invited who were saying, it's not a big deal. The sounds that we're, using for whatever it was, I can't remember it now. It doesn't bother the whales that much. Well, he had one of those sound, it sounds like a siren when you press it in a can. And he brought it from under the table and set it off, and it startled the guy. And he set it off again, and he said, how would you like it if every day of your life this went off, 20 times? How would that affect you in a negative way? So I just feel like so many of my colleagues right now are going above and beyond to prove their points about the environment. And I feel very proud to serve with so many of them. So I feel very confident on our side of the aisle with how we are working to push these environmental issues forward. And I don't see anyone letting up on that. So, so I'm going to keep fighting. I'm going to keep supporting candidates whose top priorities are the environment, because they deserve to be supported in that way. So, we still have a long way to go, of course, but this election in 2020, we have a chance to put the environment first, and everybody in this country needs to do that. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Excuse me. I'm a community organizer. I came up in the world of organizing, so I truly believe that we go back to community organizing. Community education, community empowerment. We allow for community and collective processes to define and determine solutions. A perfect example is the conversation we're having right now, led by what I believe is the generation that's going to lead us into the future, and breaking from that political pragmatism. I really, truly, honestly believe that. I think this conversation and you all and all the others that are out there are innovative, are creative, and are waging campaigns and social movements using every tool afforded to us, social media tools, communication tools. You have found ways to be resourceful and execute under this COVID. You were already finding those ways. You were already leading the way. COVID has forced us to all, but particularly we look to you as taking the leadership in the use of the social media and videos. And again, this is a perfect example of how we undo all of that pragmatism and actually mobilize in order to organize their communities towards action. And we have to break away from the business as usual models. We really do. We have to challenge them. We have to actually no longer challenge them, just break them down, tear them down. We need to recruit political candidates, do what you're doing right now, extend it, recruit your own candidates, and continue to be courageous and brave and bold in all of your approaches, because it is your generation and the generations of my grandchildren that we are leaving the care of our environment and our world, and it's in your hands. And so you're already taking bold and courageous actions. And so I would just encourage that you continue to do so, and that you hold every elected person accountable right now, every elected person accountable. You be in every committee meeting as much as you can, advocate, be activists, lobby, do everything. Make sure your presence is not only seen but felt. Have that loud, fierce voice about what you do, and that is accountability. And then while you're doing that, be preparing your candidates, our candidates for the future. Recruit and then educate and train and mobilize. We have to change and create systemic change, and the only way that we can do that is breaking down what hasn't worked, and creating these new ways of taking action, but creating structural and sustainable changes. So it's not just about the lip service or championing certain phrases or the texts that we use or whatever happens to be popular. It's really being grounded in these steps for action. Your name says it all. Your actions, your today is definitely an example. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your experiences. So kind of moving on to a slightly different subject. In the past several months, I think we've all seen the connection between the COVID-19 crisis and the climate crisis, both in those who are the most vulnerable and in the need to listen to scientists who are experts in the field. So what lessons are you learning in responding to these emergencies, and how are you applying those lessons to the way you think and the way you act on the climate crisis, the public health and economic crises that are all kind of being compounded? This will also be open to whoever would like to answer first.
So as you know, COVID has definitely, one of the things that just touched my heart early on was I started making calls to my constituents on March 16th. We came out of a legislative session. We held our next big mass gathering with our state Democratic Party convention, and then we shut down. And I was concerned about how the shutdown and COVID was affecting my constituents, and I started calling them on a personal one-to-one basis, checking wellness checks, welfare checks. How are you doing? What do we need to do? How can we respond? And it was so heart-wrenching. It was very, families were fearing for their jobs. These are family wage earners that were holding down 2 and 3 jobs just to be able to make ends meet, working at minimum wages, not even close to living wages, but they had to work 3 jobs in order just to get to living wages. And I had single mothers talking about fearing their layoffs or potential furloughs from work because they didn't have childcare, or what was going to happen to their children that were still in school. They were ill prepared, and the stories went on, and elderly fearing for what was going to happen, who was going to take them, how were they going to get to their doctor visits or to pick up their prescriptions. It was a number of issues that brought to light what we needed. I mean, the terrible effects of poverty that our citizens in the state of New Mexico have been faced with. This was not something that just occurred. Our state of poverty didn't just occur overnight. Our state of poverty has been existent for generations and generations. And when we've just been recycling these cycles of poverty, and we have not addressed cycles of opportunity in our decision making as a state. And consequently, we had individuals and families that were extremely adversely affected by this. So I have fought for all of for living wages. I've been fighting for living wages, it seems, for more than 50 plus years of my life. I've been fighting for benefits, adequate benefits, not just superficial benefits and charitable handouts in work contracts, but benefits that are useful, such as paid family leave and childcare. Things in healthcare, affordable healthcare. Healthcare for all should not even be a question. It should be a right and our responsibility to provide that. And so that's been something that I've been fighting for all my life. Fair taxes. Why is it that in a state with the highest poverty, we have the smallest percentage paying the least amount in their fair share of taxes? And we have the vast majority of our population with the burden of paying unfair taxes. And so it just reinvigorated my resolve to continue fighting, to uplift our communities in all of these arenas. I'm going to continue to fight for $15 an hour living wages or better. I'm going to continue to fight for paid family leave. I'm going to continue to fight for childcare and for educational attainment, affordable and accessible to everyone. And it just continue to reinforce that resolve. And whatever I can do to continue to push for our state investment in looking at diverse ways in which we can invest our monies so that they create revenue streams to wean us from our dependency on oil and gas and all of those structures that have led to our disparate treatment and disproportionate benefits in our state and have led to our excessive poverty in our state. And so the other, well, that pretty much just reinforced my resolve to continue to fight and do all that I can in the positions that I can to make sure that we create those cycles of opportunity. Thank you.
I couldn't agree more with everything that Representative Roybal Caballero stated. I'll just add on there that I am still fighting for a Medicare for all. People need to see a doctor when they're sick. That's the bottom line. Nobody should be going bankrupt because they can't pay their medical bills. And so, so we'll all keep fighting. Thank you.
I think I wanted to also, I would be remiss to not raise this since we just had a meeting of the Indian Affairs Interim Committee last week, and we heard from various tribal communities. And one of the communities' reports was so devastating to hear and so heart-wrenching to hear, and that is that in 2020, we still have communities in the Navajo Nation that abut our counties in New Mexico with the various chapters that still have no running water, that still do not have access to any type of broadband or even any type of infrastructure. And that the health and welfare disparities that were described, and not to mention the educational disparities, were just absolutely heart-wrenching. And it just was appalling to all of us in that committee to hear the stories over and over and over again of people and family members unnecessarily dying under these conditions, when in fact we knew and we heard from medical practitioners that were delivering healthcare on tribal lands about how simple access to preventative care would have placed the individuals that had were facing COVID in a much different position than in the life-threatening position that they were being brought in. And so these are things that just should not be happening in this current state, in this time period, and things that just force us to have the energy and the resolve to continue to fight.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. That's such important information for us all to have, and so I really appreciate that. Something else I'm also curious to hear about from you both is how you see the role of nuclear energy in a just transition off of fossil fuels. So I'll go ahead and let Representative Deb Haaland go first.
Well, I think that we have, the biggest nuclear reactor we could ever want, and it's in the sky hovering above us every single day, and we should make use of that energy. We need 100% renewable energy, and in New Mexico we absolutely need it. 350 days of sun per year, an abundance of wind, and that's where our with an infrastructure plan that we should be doing here in Congress, we need to make sure that that infrastructure is there. But I mean, we should have had this, decades ago, of course. And so I am all for making use of the big nuclear reactor in the sky, and that's the sun. And so I want to see the federal government supporting renewable energy research and development. We have 2 labs in New Mexico, more PhDs, than any state. I don't know if that's a real thing, but I'll just say it. We have more PhDs in our state than any state I can think of. I'll say it that way. We have the brain power to figure this out, and that's what I want our appropriations funding to support.
I couldn't agree more with our Congresswoman. The greatest source of nuclear energy is abundant in our state, and we have all of the resources. We have the research and development capacity in our state. In fact, the world leans on that research and development capacity in our state, and we don't access it to the degree that we should. We have countries from all over the world that are here, that come and do site visits, that come and spend periodic research time studying the ways in which our labs are contributing, excuse me, to researching and developing ways in which to capture alternative and renewable sources of energy. And so we're the last to be tapping into that. And it's just ridiculous to me that we're not putting our money, our very strapped money that we know has to have a return in a positive way, in ways in which to be able to viably look at our alternatives and be able to provide the resources necessary. And part of what we also heard again last week in some of our intro meetings is the value of the spaceport to helping mitigate us. The spaceport, although experienced many years of missteps and mismanagements and misappropriations of resources themselves that the state had invested in them, has actually begun to elevate in their recruitment of how best to address not just spaceport or space travel, but what can we do in using space in order to help us address things like broadband access. Did we know that there's a cell to space connection? And we don't have to be dealing with costly transmission of lines underground, that we actually have a cell to space capacity that we need to be able to explore further and be able to unfold and make accessible. You have countless rural communities without access to electricity, a lack of access to even cell capacity, much less broadband, and yet we have a company that was just brought in by our state economic development secretary and her department that's going to research how we can make that cell to space, space to cell work for our vast rural communities in our state. So there's just so many things that we can do with our limited resources, but if we invest in the right way. I don't know if that was part of the answer, but I certainly agree wholeheartedly with the Congresswoman.
Just to add to that, I think we'd like to hear your thoughts on science-based policy. Like I think some of you have mentioned before, like with COVID-19, we've seen how important it is that politicians respect and heed the science. The scientific and public health realities have demanded incredible changes in our everyday lives and society in order to protect human lives. In the case of climate change, there were very similar threats to life, and yet science is not being heeded. The global scientific consensus is that we have 10 years to reverse emissions and achieve 50% reduction to our carbon neutrality. In New Mexico, for example, the ETA doesn't get us anywhere close to that, sadly, and there's no plan to reduce oil and gas extraction in the Permian Basin. The policy you mentioned, Congresswoman, also has emissions reduced by 2030, after the window that scientists have given us has closed. So I want to direct it especially to the Congresswoman, because I know you've got to leave soon, but how can we hold politicians accountable for science-based policies?
Well, I mean, I feel like in a state like New Mexico, with Democrats in every single statewide office, we have both the House and the Senate. We have every federal office, and that's for a reason. Because New Mexicans, they want leaders who are going to fight for these things. It's clear. The voters of New Mexico have spoken. And so we have our charge, right? And the environment is extremely important to the vast number of New Mexicans. And we care about like certain things. We kind of articulated those today. The problem is in the states with elected officials who don't feel this way. I mean, there's states across this country, and we saw it last time, right? Who were trying to oppress people's votes, who are knocking people off the rolls, 500,000 people off the rolls so they can't get out and vote. There are people in other states not with Democratic majorities who are doing everything they can to kick people off of their health care, to pass legislation that will say we're not going to cover pre-existing conditions, to say that we should cut food stamps and all these things that we know help people. We have folks in those states who have stopped Speaker Pelosi from negotiating a stimulus bill during this terrible, terrible pandemic that would help workers across the country just to make ends meet. And so, I see it. It's terrible that that we're unable to have influence over states like that. However, the way we can hold them accountable is by making sure that the folks who believe in science are in the majority, and that means voting. And I feel like right now, because we're in this pandemic, so many of us, we've been on Zoom, right? We're using Zoom for everything. We can join Zoom events you know, in Florida if we wanted to. We can join them in you know, North Dakota and South Dakota and places like that. And that's what we need to do, is to make sure that we are helping candidates in those states to win their elections. Candidates who care about science, candidates who care about working families, candidates who care whether people, you know, have a mask to wear during a pandemic or not. And I think that's what we all need to do. Now, we need to vote here in New Mexico. Everybody needs to make sure that they're registered to vote and vote, and whether they order a ballot online and get it in their mailbox, or whether they go to early voting with their mask and their gloves on and vote that way, and their hand sanitizer. But I think we can all lend a hand in some of those areas. We have some wonderful candidates running all over this country to flip red seats to blue. And I just will say that it's easy by Zoom now, by Zoom, by telephone, by text, that you can help candidates like that across the country to make sure that they win and that their voice is heard. And I mean, that's what we need. We need a Democratic majority in the Senate, and we need Joe Biden as president. And that's the bottom line, if we're going to have a chance to make these changes.
Thank you, and thank you, Congresswoman. That's absolutely right on target, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. And it goes back to you hold politicians accountable by being present. You organize, you mobilize, you advocate, you lobby, you do everything possible to be present in those decision-making processes. But more importantly, it goes back to just what the Congresswoman outlined. It starts with having the right politicians in those decision-making positions. And we have, in the state of New Mexico, we have every member of the House running for election. And we have the opportunity to be able to make some, and every Senate position is open, and we have a responsibility to make sure that we are electing individuals that represent, excuse me, what you're organizing and mobilizing for, and that's really important. Representation is the very it's democracy. You know, you elect the persons to represent your interests in your communities and the constituencies, and to not necessarily represent the very systems and interests that have led to our continued state of poverty in New Mexico. So those are the kinds of decisions that have to be made, and then just be present as much as possible.
I just want to now thank you both, and thank you especially Representative Haaland. I know that you have to go now, and so we just want to show our appreciation for being here and sharing your wisdom and leadership with us. Hope you have a good night. Any last closing statements you want to make? The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate it. I am so sorry that I have to leave a few minutes early, but it's been an honor to be here with all of you. I thank you guys, the young folks who are sacrificing so much to make sure that that we, the elected officials, will be on the right side of history. So I appreciate so much everything that all of you are doing. YUCCA Action. I want to remind everybody that we need Patricia Roybal Caballero's voice in our state house. And I encourage every single one of you to go to her website, make a contribution, pitch in so that she can buy a few signs, so that she can buy literature, so that she can you know, pay for the things that she needs to. Nobody wins, nobody runs a campaign without money. It's just impossible. So I encourage all of you, and there it is. Carlos is holding up a sign right there. Patricia, 4nm.com. You can make a contribution there, and you can bet that I am going to make a contribution to Patricia, my dear friend and my fierce warrior woman in the State House. Thank you so much for inviting me, everyone.
Thank you, Congressman. So, Congresswoman, I keep saying Congressman, Congresswoman, for being a fierce ally of mine, and I truly appreciate you participating with all of us. And please know that I had pledged to share what we raised tonight with the youth and YUCCA Action, so that they can continue to be a strong voice in moving the discussion of climate change and climate action forward on behalf of all of our communities. So thank you so very much, and wish you very best.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. And so we are on our final question. And our final question is, so many people are so disillusioned with our failed democracy, and a lot of members, our families and communities, know that this system was never created with us in mind. What do you say to all the people in the United States who are disenfranchised and are struggling to find a reason to believe their vote matters?
Well, first of all, I would draw attention to all of you. And to all of us, and to the voice of the Congresswoman that we just heard from, to realize that there is always hope, and that if we have, and we take bold action, and we're courageous in taking that bold action, that we don't hesitate, and that we realize that everything is in our hands. Whatever changes occur, we have it in our hands. We're responsible for creating the changes that need to occur. And we do that with the power of our vote. And we just had that conversation concerning why it's so very important to measure and evaluate and hold accountable the people that we exercise our vote to put in office, because we're electing those individuals to represent us. And so also I want all of us to recall the power of the vote. There was a time, and most of you have learned it in history, when we had the New Deal. And it occurred when progressives took back political power. And this is all about taking back political power. If you feel that there has to be a change, it's in our hands to do that with our vote. And that's taking back political power and lifting. They did it then, and we can do it now. We can lift our working class up. We can build Mother Nature up, and we can lift our working class and rebuild the middle class. And it's time for us to be fair and just in all that we do. We can decentralize power and authority and money. And it doesn't have to be that way. And it's the way in which we go about doing that is actually exercising democracy in its best forms. And so we need to democratize our economy. We need to democratize our energy. And we have to make sure that we do that. And it begins with exercising our vote. That's really important. And keeping those of us that you have felt have been your voice in office, and making sure that you begin to recruit and feel that you have the power in your hands, and that you have the power here and here in your heart to know what will take us forward into the future that you're envisioning. And just know that we have to find ways to stimulate and diversify our economy, and it begins with taking power back and putting it into the collective hands of our democracy. And I firmly believe that. I've spent my entire life dedicated to that. I've seen the changes. I've seen how we can, how the power of the vote has in fact influenced many positive changes. And to reinstill that faith in those that are asking the question, why vote? And they're both the same. They're not. You saw witness tonight to what distinguishes myself from my opponent, what distinguishes the Congresswoman, why she and I call ourselves our fierce warrior women. We all have to feel fierce, and all have to feel that warrior blood in us, and we all have to know that the power lies right here, and it's in our hands, and it's not something that is unattainable. We can attain that, and we can take it. We just have to be fervently, again, goes back to my mantra, organize, mobilize to act. Organize, mobilize to act. And that is what will create systemic change. And I truly do believe that. I have to believe it. I see it in your faces, and I have a 6-year-old grandson and a 4-year-old grandson that I'm hoping are their uncle and their father and their grandfathers and myself will see that their future is actually in your hands. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for all that you've shared and for your incredible leadership. You know, coming from a youth perspective, it really means a lot to see other people who, you know, who can stand by and ally with. As for YUCCA, our vision for a just transition in New Mexico starts with the acknowledgement that we are facing an emergency. The temperature dropped drastically last night throughout the entire state, and today farmers have lost their crops with this deep early freeze. Birds are literally falling from the sky, and many folks are now struggling to keep their homes warm on top of the stress that already existed to cover all the bills during this COVID pandemic. Everywhere around us, we see the impacts of the climate crisis and the need to build towards a just transition and recovery that finally acknowledges our abusive relationship with fossil fuel extraction in our state and find a way to end it. We need to develop a transition plan for the state of New Mexico that both studies the economic alternatives and makes funding available for local communities to pursue innovative strategies to generate sustainable development from local energy production through community solar, restoration, and other green economic endeavors and traditional lifeways. Then of course, we need to divest to reinvest. When our leaders talk about needing oil and gas monies to fund our education, they are holding us hostage. We need to move money from extractive and racist endeavors like our police system and the military-industrial complex into systems that foster and bring life and well-being to our communities. We need to keep remaining fossil fuels in the ground through moratoriums on new drilling and a national ban on fracking exports. We need real regulation and enforcement that protects our water and our land. We need to hold industry accountable for the costs of cleanup through bonding. We need economic, social, and environmental justice. So we are calling on all of our fellow youth and adult allies and elders to demand real change this election and get involved to make your voices heard.
So I would say thank you, and social consciousness is social justice. That really, we really need to build that social consciousness. So thank you for that statement. That was very important.
Thank you.
We want to thank Representative Patricia Roybal, Caballero, and Congresswoman Deb Haaland for joining us tonight for this discussion, this really important discussion on climate and our communities here in New Mexico. We look forward to working with you both in the future to implement changes that benefit our community, our climate, and thank you both for the work that you do around this crisis and for treating it with the urgency it deserves.
And we want to thank everybody for being with us tonight and everyone who has graciously donated. We're encouraging everyone to donate what they are able. Some elected officials take money from corporations, and others like Representative Roybal Caballero rely on us, the people, to collectively show our support with our dollars during the campaign and with our votes at the ballot. However large or small a donation, your donation is your voice on these issues. We want to elect people and support organizations in New Mexico that will make the bold changes that we need and fight for environmental and social justice in our communities. You can learn more about Patricia and her campaign at patricia4nm.com. Again, patricia4, the number, nm.com. For direct donations, please find the link in the Zoom chat thread or on the Facebook page. And once again, thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, and thank you to the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center once again for their generosity and allowing me to be here tonight. And thank you all to the community, and thank you, YUCCA Action.
All right, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your night. Stay safe.
Thank you, you too.